Good evening, everyone. My name is Caroline Williams, and this is my discussion for defining a community for community engagement and outreach, ISCI 702. I apologize that you are seeing the screen sharing and stop share bar. I can't get rid of that right now, unfortunately, but we will dive right in. I know we don't have a lot of time. I have to click over here, two monitors. All right, so there are actually a lot of definitions of homelessness. It does not simply mean that one does not have a house in which to live. There are multiple definitions according to the law, according to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and in the field of social work. I'll go over those in the next slide. Generally, homelessness is defined as lacking safe, stable, and adequate housing. So if we are to use Bradshaw's definition of community, which we all read about last week, which is shared identity, solidarity, and a set of norms not necessarily bound by place, then homeless patrons by definition are their own community, which of course means that librarians need to ensure they are practicing cultural humility with this particular community. So we have the four types of homelessness, and I have type them out here. This comes from, and I've linked it in case you would like to see it, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, aka HUD. They have four types of homelessness. First is literally homeless, which is an individual or family who lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. Two is imminent risk of homelessness, which is an individual or family who will imminently lose their primary nighttime residence within 14 days. Then number three is homelessness under different federal statutes. And I've cited the statute there. That's 24 CFR Part 578. CFR is Code of Federal Regulations. And then number four is fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, who have no other residence and lack the support or resources to obtain other permanent housing. Now, that's a very legal definition. That's a very, I guess, pragmatic way of looking at homelessness. But the nonprofit Comic Relief, which is dedicated to ending poverty and homelessness, has four definitions of homelessness that we're perhaps more culturally aware of. So first one, we have transitional homelessness. These are people who are in unhoused situations for less than a year, perhaps due to a major life change or catastrophic event. And then we have episodic homelessness, which is people who are currently unhoused or have experienced at least 3 periods of homelessness within the last 12 months. And then we have chronic homelessness, which is people who have been unhoused in unhoused situations for more than 1 year. When we think of homeless, typically this is the definition that we are thinking of. And then we have hidden homelessness, which is individuals who temporarily live with others, and they don't have a permanent home, who lack access to housing support resources and therefore are much harder to identify by government and law enforcement agencies. So, how is the homeless community treated in LIS literature? In reading through different things and just being part of general library culture when I worked at the library, there are some trends that I've noticed. First is that the homeless community is generally lumped into one broad category of homeless without any differentiation of the types, or really any real consideration for any of those types as well. And this is when we most think of chronic homelessness as being the kind of homeless, quote unquote, that we are talking about. A lot of LIS literature suggests ways that librarians can best serve patrons. A lot of this focuses around more social work training and maybe hiring staff with social work background. There's a lot of discussion about mental health for both patrons and library workers alike. So being sensitive to a library patron's mental health, and then caring for yourself with compassion fatigue and burnout being so prevalent in public librarianship. And then there's a small subset of literature, not unnoticeable, but large enough that I noticed a trend of literature that discusses homeless patrons as security concerns. So there are some common representations of the homeless community in the literature and in library culture, and we kind of talked about this already in how they are treated in LIS literature. but I think it bears repeating. So these are not, I should say, these statements are not what I think. These statements are about what I think about homeless people or people who are unhoused. I don't want you to think that at all. These are statements that are stereotypes of the community that I have seen. So stereotypes include that all homeless patrons are all mentally ill, that homeless patrons are a security risk due to that mental illness, that all homeless patrons are chronically homeless and mostly just individuals. We don't hear a lot about youths or families. And most, if not all, homeless patrons struggle with substance abuse. We used to get a lot of training at the public library I worked at on substance abuse. The administration, I should say, was fixated on that. So those are some of the stereotypes that come out when discussing the community and sometimes even in the literature, to be honest. So for the future, I think that librarians need to be more careful about differentiating between different types of homelessness so that they're not lumping everyone together. Obviously, not everyone who is homeless or is unhoused is experiencing chronic homelessness. If funding permits, I think it would be helpful to have a licensed social worker on staff to help ease the burden on librarians. Librarians are already asked to be so many things, and there are more serious issues that come up when patrons are dealing with homelessness that we can't always help with. Um, what another thing that we can do is post literature in the library organized by resource type for patrons experiencing homelessness. This is something we did in our library. We organized it by shelter, where to find food, where to find showers, where to find medical care. And a lot of those flyers went very quickly. So it's in a discreet place where people don't feel like they're being vulnerable by asking for help, but that help is still there. Lastly, ensure that all staff are properly trained for dangerous patrons of all types, not just those who are homeless. And ensure that staff concerns about safety are actually being heard and addressed. Too often, administration especially just tells librarians that, oh, you're doing such good work. This is just the nature of the job. No, we need to care for all our patrons equally, and we need to advocate for our patrons equally, and that only happens if we are heard. So all of this will help us achieve cultural humility because it's emphasizing and recognizing these power imbalances and helping foster respectful relationships with individuals from different cultural and community backgrounds. Here is my reference list for your convenience so that you all can look at some of the articles that I read. Thank you and have a great rest of the week.